This is basically a session on how to talk in broadcast and how to script things so that the people reading your scripts don't stumble, bumble, and do all of that, because we actually write for TV different than we write for newspaper. So that's really what this is trying to get you acquainted to the language of broadcast writing. This is a whole semester course in 45 minutes. So I'm going to go through a million things. You don't have to take notes. I'll be more than happy to share all of this information with you. Just send me an email afterward, jj@midwestemmys.org, and I will be happy to help do this and send this to you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and get right into it here. Let's close that. So we have certain mechanics, things that we do to write our scripts, obviously, to make it easier to read. There's no single authority to do it. Different stations do it different ways. Some have different formats, etc., whatnot. But this is just to help give you the basics on how to make it easier for people to read. One story per page. Just try to keep it one per page for the short stories. Obviously, if you're writing packages, things go a little longer. Double space so the sentences don't bleed so close together, make it easier for the people reading it. Type in all caps. To me, it's easier to read in all capitals. Some like to do regular sentence case, whatnot. All caps just makes it easier for the eyeballs, especially when you have teleprompters that are far away. Writing in all caps really helps. Use about 25 characters per line for your teleprompter to make it easier. This helps to avoid being able to watch people's eyes move across the screen and reading big, long sentences like this. So the bigger it is, the less you see the eye movement. Use paragraphs. What I do is each sentence is a new paragraph. Trying to start a new sentence after a period, sometimes an anchor will miss a period, miss a comma, something like that with the punctuation. Each new sentence is a new paragraph. There's no set limits, indent. You can indent one space, two spaces, or no indent at all, as long as you have a good separation of space. But each sentence should be a different space. Don't split hyphenated words and phrases from line to line, because you might have somebody say, never split hyphenated words from phrases line to line. You see what I'm saying? I'm going down 2 lines there by doing that. When we write numbers, you throw a bunch of numbers up, it can be hard to read, and people can miss decimal points or commas or whatnot. So numbers 1 to 9, spell the words out. See how I have 1 to 9? 10 to 99, go ahead and use the 999, use the digits. Over 1,000 other things, use the proper prefix. Look how I've written it. 1,000, 1-1000. There's no way your anchor can misread that, but if you just have the number, the comma, and the numbers, they could do that. Use dashes between words. So here's a couple examples. 5,000, 14,500,012. See how easy that was to read? Always spell out a number if it begins a sentence. Fractions are spelled out using a slash, so don't put the actual fractions, spell them out. 1/3, 4/5, if you need it. Numbers with decimal points, spell out the point. Especially, this is like business things, like when we're doing the Dow Jones is down 3 point whatever, or if you're doing percentages, we put the word point in there so the person reading it makes sure to say point. Because they could say 3 dot whatever and doesn't work. So spell out percent, don't use the sign. We're just trying to eliminate ways of making readable mistakes. Phone numbers are normal, addresses are normal, years are normal, dates, digit, proper suffix, that's fine. Time, I avoid AM and PM. I'll just say, 9 o'clock this evening, 7 o'clock yesterday morning, something like that. Sports scores, this can vary how you want to do things, dashes, um, prices. I kind of still stick with the numbers thing, 9 cents. See, I spelled out the word nine, but I didn't spell out the word 15. $4.59. When it comes to names, this is again more on the news side. Use a person's age if it's to identify them. We usually use this more for when we're identifying people accused of something. We want to make sure it's, 39-year-old Tom Smith, so the other Tom Smiths don't feel like they're being accused. The age comes before the name, kind of depends upon the type of story, but generally in criminal, just stuff like that. Or if it's in a feature, then you can write a different, nice way around it. I don't usually use a person's address. Um, let's see. Is that all that I had on the numbers? That is all I had on the numbers. So I'll go to the next one. So normally what I do is when I do these presentations for my students, I'll give them the numbers thing, and then I have a series of worksheets, and I'll have a worksheet and I'll have different things on them, and I'll say, now write these in broadcast form. And that way I build some reinforcement. It adds, test scores, quiz scores, whatnot that you can add into students' averages for their grading. So at the end of that, I would have done a worksheet. So we have names and titles. Titles help identify people. Normally when we're talking about officials, we say their title before their name because we need to know who they are, or why they're important before their name. So Northwestern National Bank economist Alice Smith says, Ace Tractor president Vernon Jones, Governor Helen Burns, World War II veteran Delbert Anderson, etc. And that's only in the first reference. You don't have to do that every time you reference, but sometimes, for the most part, the first time you're referencing them. Courtesy titles only used if they're essential. You don't need to use Mr., Miss, Mrs., Mr., unless it has some sort of impact or a way that's being, if somebody is known as Miss Daisy, then yes, call them Miss Daisy because that's what they're known as. If, someone is a doctor and it's a doctor related story, go ahead and say doctor. I don't use reverend unless it's necessarily, or specifically requested by the person or used in the context of a religious service. Reference. First references include first and last name. After that, just the last name. Sometimes we use middle initials only when extra clarity is needed on a person's name or identifying. You may omit the first names of well-known people. President Biden, you just say President Biden. You don't always have to say President Joe Biden. Secretary of State Blinken. See what I did here? I actually put a pronouncer in here. So somebody, reading it, especially if they're reading it cold, I don't know how to pronounce this person's name. It may even seem easy, but I didn't know if this was Blinken or Blinken. And from listening to what I could find, I took it as Blinken. So that's how I put that in there so the person would read it correctly. Police Chief Jones, etc. You may start a story with a familiar name, but not an unfamiliar one. It's okay to say President Biden will return to the White House today, but a poor one would be Jenna Bush is out on the town. Some of you may not even know who Jenna Bush is. That's why. Jenna Bush actually happens to be a daughter of former President George H.W. Bush from a long time ago. Don't refer to spouses unless it's important to the story. Use phonetics, pronouncers. That's what I referred to in that previous slide. Pronouncers, following a difficult word, and put in parentheses, the Greek god Dione. Now, you could also capitalize some of these words if there's a specific emphasis. Like if I wanted to say Dione, I could capitalize the O, so the person would say Dione. They would see the emphasis that way. Once again, I would get through this exercise and give them a worksheet. I know I'm going fast. It's a lot of material, but I'm not expecting everybody to absorb it. Just kind of listen for things that you're like, oh, that makes sense, or I want to remember that. And again, email me, I'll send you all this. Punctuation. We use periods, use question marks sparingly, exclamation points sparingly. I hardly ever use an exclamation point in writing a broadcast script. I try to avoid a comma. Instead of a comma, I will usually do the ellipsis, 3 dots like that to help tell my anchors if I need them to pause a little bit. Like if I'm listing a couple things, this, that, and the other thing, I would go this, dot, 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 that, dot, 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 and the other thing. And slashes, obviously, only sparingly like that. Parentheses, I don't use in for something that the anchor would read. It's only used for something that they need to know. I don't use quotation marks. If there's a quote, I will actually script quote and also use quotation marks to make sure that the anchor says quote. Apostrophes don't use a lot. I hardly ever use colons or semicolons because that breaks up sentences. And if you're having to use a colon or a semicolons, your sentences are too long. Same thing with a comma. If you have to use a comma, generally your sentence is too long. Break it down into 2 separate sentences. Mechanics. I think it's a little bit more conversational to use contractions. Use can't instead of cannot. Didn't instead of did not. Unless, of course, you want that emphasis. You know, so-and-so says they did not do that. And then actually how I would script that, I would do did, and then I would put little asterisks on the front and back of not as my cue for the anchor to emphasize not. So there's ways around that. Pop or soda instead of soft drink, mugged instead of assaulted, robbed, you know, find conversational ways to do things. This goes back to the old school days of correcting mistakes in copy by drawing a single line through it, writing the correct word above it. Can you tell this goes back to paper stuff? But nowadays you can make your corrections, but if you're doing it on the fly and you've got a paper script and there's a correction, the best way to do it, cross out that word, write the correct thing on top, especially if you're just working off paper scripts. I try not to use abbreviations because people can mix those up. I say street, court, lane, doctor, Minnesota, whatever. Spell it out. That way you know it's going to be said properly. Well-known organizations may be referred to by their abbreviation like YMCA, NAACP. In fact, most people probably doesn't even know anymore what those mean, but they're so commonplace. Same thing with like NASA. Unfamiliar organizations should be identified and then use an abbreviation so people know what you're talking about after that. Consolidated Hangnail Enterprises, or CHE. I mean, you could go on like that. Abbreviations which are read as a word are written without dashes, NATO, NASA, etc. Abbreviations which should be read as letters should be with dashes. NCAA, GAO, USA. Again, that forces the anchor to make sure that they say every single letter. And worksheet time. Now in style, that was just some of the mechanics. Here's some of the style that we use to kind of put those pieces together. Keys to a broadcast style: we strive for accuracy, clarity, tightness, conciseness, and attention holding. So you write for the ear. You attribute. Attribute where you're getting information. This is very critical to people. You know, if you're saying there's 24 new flu deaths today in Minnesota, you need to state where you got that information. You can't just come off as presenting facts. You need to justify that. So you would have to script. The Minnesota Health Department says they've reported 24 new deaths today. Attribute that factual information. And do it visually as well in graphics and stuff. When you're putting statistics, everything up there, make sure you graphically reinforce where you're getting that information to add credibility to your statements. Use present tense when possible, paraphrase. It's not always necessary to be grammatically perfect. So I wouldn't script, with whom are you speaking? I'd say, who are you talking about? See, so you can be conversational in that way. Keep sentences short, 10 to 12 words. If you feel that comma coming on, make it 2 sentences. Use familiar words. What I mean by this is, especially if, it's easy for a reporter to want to say, the victim suffered from lacerations and contusions, because that's what it says on the press release. You can actually say they suffered cuts and bruises, because a laceration is a cut, and a contusion is a bruise. So use familiar words. If somebody's giving you legal speak, cop speak, official speak, find out what the familiar word phrases use. Verb tenses vary: present, present perfect, future. You can get into all that. My big thing is just speak in an active voice. Try to avoid past tense as possible, and really try to get rid of the word was. Was is the biggest key indicator of a passive sentence. The bicycle was found by police abandoned at the park. Police found the bicycle abandoned at the park. Boom. It's an active sentence. It's subject, verb, object. Simple. Use time phrases. We talked about that. Most current information in the lead. We don't usually drop exact times. We don't say the fire broke out at 7:03. The fire broke out shortly after 7 this morning. It's like you're talking to people instead of talking at people. Vivid adjectives, adverbs help. Action-oriented verbs help. That's where we're talking about the active voice, right? Active and not passive. Use attribution when needed. It's not always needed. Use proper backgrounding, and don't use a person's sex, race, creed, national origin, handicap, sexual orientation, unless it has newsworthiness to the story. Otherwise, it just doesn't matter. Don't use information just because you have it. There must be a logical reason to put it in the story. And paraphrase and stay away from direct quotes unless you are needing an official statement from somebody and they don't give it to you on camera. Then yes, that's your way to do it. Let's see. Don't start a sentence with long modifying phrases and clauses. Here's a poor example. Hoping to clarify the situation with respect to the recession, President Biden will address Congress tomorrow. Well, first of all, I see a comma. That means I need 2 different sentences, and I can make these active sentences. So I just turn these 2 sentences into one. President Biden hopes to clarify the economic situation tomorrow in an address to Congress. I could even shorten it. Tomorrow, when he addresses Congress, would even be more conversational. Don't dangle modifying phrases or clauses. I hate when phrases and clauses dangle. It reminds me, was that Conjunction Junction, the old cartoon from the 70s when I was a kid growing up? The country has reached the bottom of the recession, according to a report released today by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Flip that around. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says the country has reached the bottom of the recession. See how that's just a much cleaner, simpler sentence to read. Don't place long or confusing information between the subject and verb. Cuban refugees, after suffering an all-night bombardment by the Cuban Navy, surrendered this morning. Well, that's hard to read. The Cuban refugees surrendered this morning following an all-night bombardment by the Navy. Same thing. Just a lot less words, direct to the point, and active. Try not to use run-on sentences, make new sentences. Here's a poor one, Edina Mayer. And if I was scripting this for folks of you, if I knew you weren't from here, I would actually put a pronouncer behind Edina. It was funny because I used to teach a radio broadcasting course at a college where we got a lot of folks from out of state. Edna, Edina, I mean, we had all sorts of pronouncers for it. And I left it in there so people would learn because they would ask, hey, how do you pronounce this? I say, that's why we put pronouncers in there. So Edina Mayer John Anderson, who took office only 6 months ago, announced today he wouldn't be a candidate for re-election because he feels improving Edina's government is a hopeless task. Boy, that's a long sentence and that's a big mouthful. Rewrite it, put it into 2 sentences. Edina Mayer John Anderson says he won't be a candidate for re-election or won't seek re-election, even fewer words. Anderson feels improving Edina's government is a hopeless task. Today's decision comes just 6 months after he took office. 3 nice, short, concise sentences saying the same thing, but a whole lot easier to read, a whole lot easier to follow and understand. Subject, verb, object. We talked about this. Beware of clauses. Avoid using the word alleged. According to court documents, police say, attribute what you're saying. Alleged is just, the word just won't protect you in a court of law. You need to attribute where you're getting your information. Death should be dealt with in a dignified manner, but pretty simple. Passed away is, they died. So-and-so died. That's just the simple, easiest way. Be careful of confusing pronoun references. Here's a poor example. The president and the prime minister will return to Camp David this afternoon. He's then expected to hold a news conference. Why is that bad? Who's he? You just listed 2 people, and then you said he's expected to hold a news conference. I don't know who he is. So those should only be used when you are making a direct reference of that person before and continuing with that person in the next sentence. Now we're getting into a little bit more of kind of story construction or a little bit of things, and this is quick things, headlines, sentence, teasers, these are actual headlines, so beware of what you write and how they may sound, because they might look good in print or in copy, but squad helps dog bite victim. So the squad helps the dog bite the victim, or did he help a dog bite victim? See how that can be confusing. Enraged cow injures farmer with axe. Miners refuse to work after death. Well, I'd hope so. I don't want to work after death. I'm all done after that. Juvenile court to try shooting defendant. So the juvenile court is going to try to shoot defendant. Not good. Police begin campaign to run down jaywalkers. Farmer Bill dies in house. Panda mating fails. Veterinarian takes over. Teacher strikes idle kids. Red tape holds up bridge. Kids make nutritious snacks. Delicious. This is funny because this is actually the name of 2 towns in our area. Fertile woman dies in climax. Fertile is a small town. Climax is another town, but you get the innuendo. Sentence headlines, they kind of tell a complete story, so you kind of summarize it. 1 to 3 short sentences, usually 2. Grammatical complete sentences give only basic story information, follow most mechanics, punctuation, style, and construction rules. Teasers, they're deliberately incomplete. That's the difference between a headline and a tease. Headline, you're giving the big part of the story to get them to watch, and a teaser is enticing somebody to watch. They're deliberately incomplete, sometimes confusing. They can't stand alone as a story. 3 to 7 words, frequently non-grammatical, right in the most current tense. The purpose is to gain attention. and use colorful adjectives and adverbs. My favorite story to tell about this is working in Tucson, and Lake Havasu in Arizona had a fecal contamination problem. And I don't know what I wrote for a headline, but my executive producer didn't like it. And he wrote something which I will never forget to this day, that the headline tease was, "It's Arizona's #1 lake. Now it's filled with #2." So that was his clever way of writing that. Story construction, um, kind of beginning, middle, end, if you will, kind of looking at the story. You know, traditional newspaper is inverted and triangle, and we're kind of the upside down. Um, Newspapers have as many facts as possible in the first. They're awkward to read, sometimes too much information. You know, broadcast writing, the soft lead is to capture the attention or ease into it. Soft lead can be 2-3 sentences. More of a broadcast rectangle. Important facts will follow in order, for the most part. And this says many broadcast stories are only 3 to 4 sentences long. That's true. Outside of the packages that the reporters do, if you look at the VOs and VOSATs, they're 4, 5, 6 sentences. That's it. They're summarizing a whole story and they're moving on to up the story count. So soft lead tips, you know, to grab attention, keep the first sentence short. It's not a headline, should still be a complete sentence, and save the most important fact for the second sentence. You entice them with the first sentence, grab them with the second. A hard lead is, boom, you're just coming right out and you're giving them the over and arching headline for the day. Organization and newsworthiness, you know, take all the facts that you gather of a story. You want to do the story and you're gathering all this information. You have all these facts, all these notes. Isolate the key points that you want to communicate. What does the viewer need to know versus what he, she wants to know? Make sure you're answering all their questions. How the story is obtained, such as a news conference, is not as important as what is said. Poor, for example, Minneapolis Mayor Jim Jones held a news conference today. Jones says he won't seek re-election. A good soft lead is Minneapolis will have a new mayor in November. People go, ooh, what's going on? You hooked me. Then you go in, incumbent Jim Jones says he won't seek another term. Then Jones made the announcement at a City Hall news conference. So you kind of buried the City Hall news conference there later because you don't need to it. A good hard lead, you know, is right to the point. Minneapolis Mayor Jim Jones says he won't seek re-election. Speaking at a news conference, Jones said, and then you move on. So there's 2 different styles to write the same story. When you're organizing your story, decide the order of importance of your key points. If you want something to reveal later, you know, make sure you set your mind up that you want to reveal this later, and how are you going to get to that reveal to make that an impactful moment. Newsworthiness, when you're looking at whether something should be newsworthy or not. Here's some criteria. Timeliness, how recently did it occur? Is it happening now? Did it just happen? Is it going to happen tomorrow? Timeliness. Proximity, how close to you is an event happening or impact? This is where you can take national stories or state stories or even city stories and seeing if it's going to impact you at your school. The prominence, how well known is the event or the people that are involved? Consequences, how does it affect me? How does it affect the school? How does it affect the teachers? How does it affect the world? And human interest, does it catch your emotions? Is it odd or is it coincidental? You know, doing a feature on your math teacher may not seem like a, you know, very cool story, but if you find out that your math teacher has a Harley Davidson collection, that might be kind of cool. You wouldn't expect your geometry or your algebra teacher to have a Harley Davidson collection. That actually was my math teacher in high school back in the 80s. That was kind of cool. You find out those unique things about everyday people. Um, I don't like calling this the structure formula because I don't believe in formulas, but if you're looking for a way to help organize things, gather all of your facts, organize them in the order that you want to present them. Then write to yourself, say to yourself, and summarize the whole story in a few short sentences without looking at your notes. If you can't summarize your entire story in 2 or 3 quick sentences, then you may not have a good focus to your story, or you may have too much stuff in your story. And then write the lead, and then with the other facts, develop the rest of the story. When it comes to having to do packages and stuff in schools or even on TV, what I told my staff is, a lot of people go in and they start writing their package first, and then they go in and start writing their stuff and then the anchor stuff, and then they end up repeating stuff. And I tell them, start with your anchor lead. Start right there at the top. How are you going to hook people with why your story is important before it even gets done being read out of the anchor's mouths? Then what are you going to say? Then what's your package going to say? And write it in that order, and your flow will be so much better. Wrap up your story with a final fact. Leave open the possibility for future information or advance. The next meeting on this project is going to be so-and-so. The next game is at such and such. Always, let people know, where's this going to next. Then proofread your story. Look for style, mechanics, punctuation errors. Proofread your story again out loud for objectivity, accuracy, and clarity. Are you presenting both sides? Are you giving as best you can equal time to equal sides of the issues? See, there's already proofreading twice in here. So you write, rewrite, and rewrite as necessary. Don't just be, I'm getting it all done, and boom, now we're doing it. And then if your story has something else to it or is going in a next step, make sure you leave a note in your newsroom or your school station calendar on what's next. Where's this story going? What's the next element to this? And then file your notes and keep your notes. So that would be somewhat of a formula. And then I won't go into the reporting, interviewing, crime and punishment, and all of that stuff, because that just gets into a lot of other stuff for another time. But I just want to show you some exercises that I used. So, word usage. This is from the style section. Circle the preferred terms for the options below. Brown, a citizen or a resident here for 17 years. Which word would you use? Resident. I don't even like using that word. I would say Brown, who lived here for 17 years, because I like to write conversational. Passed away, died, or expired. He died. Burial or internment will be at Green Lawn Cemetery tomorrow. Burial. The youth hanged himself from a rafter in the garage. Hanged would actually be grammatically correct. She is ill of, and some of these I wouldn't even write this way. I'm just looking at the other words. She is ill with pneumonia. Funeral rites or obsequy. I don't even know. I can't even pronounce that word, so I know I wouldn't use it. So this would just be an example, and you can, look at that how you want it. This was rewrite the following faulty sentences in proper broadcast style. He almost does some kind of exercise each day. He almost exercises every day. That's how I'd rewrite that. Get people to rewrite things, stuff like that, using that. Actually going to the mechanics here. This is where, in the general mechanics, correct the following according to proper broadcast mechanics. So YMCA, I would do Y-C- or Y-M-C-A. So write the abbreviation for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So I put examples there, ask them to convert it, and do stuff like that. So these worksheets would always emphasize uh, the protect the thing here. Here's one where put in a makeshift story. And this is on formatting because I asked people, because this was for a radio class here, they would have to put the story slug, they would have to put the date, who wrote it by, what show it's going to be, stuff like that. That's all in another thing. All of you should have some sort of standardized script formatting. So every script is written the same way. And then that way you can help police that sort of stuff. For examples, here's a script format. So I basically give some info on what this is about. So sample script, it would be the story number, the slug, the read time, what was it, a VO, VOSAT, whatnot. I'd have the anchor here. This is for the anchor and for the prompter. This is for my director, so my director can follow along. I would have the anchor's name, and OC stood for on camera. OS with a graphic title would be over the shoulder with whatever graphic it is. But it's written on the left-hand side for the director. It's written on the right-hand side for the talent. As you can see, each sentence should be a new line. I'm just using X's. This, of course, is the anchor intro. Here is where you would take the video, so the director knows to take the video there. Here's the CG that needs to come in there. I should actually put a space in there. And this would be VO out, and these pound symbols at the bottom signify end of the story. So however you want to script things for your technical crew, that's up to you, but you should have a consistent way of doing it. And then for a test, I just kind of, TV news paragraph should be indented 3 spaces. The actual answer is false because there's no set limit. It could be whatever, but you could customize that. Our paragraphs should be in whatever sentences. So, using different things. I put in a practice script. I ask them to tell me what the things are. Do some mechanics. I have them work with writing with some numbers, sentences, things like that. And that's how I would do testing with these folks to help not only reinforce what they're teaching so they can put it into practical use again and again and again before they start writing stories. But then obviously with quizzes and tests, you can keep score, you keep track, and you can figure out where they need help and stuff like that. So there you go. There's a semester's worth of stuff in 40 minutes. Any questions? I have all of this stuff in a Dropbox folder, so those that are interested could certainly send me their email address. I will add you to the folder. You can download these things. You can customize these however you want. I mean, these courses, these things, documents I have are in some point a couple generations old, because Brown College actually used to be Brown Institute, and some of this is from old radio days combined with new TV days, and even things are changing now in the way that things are doing, but the basics are all still there. We just update things as we need them, as they fit into our way of doing things. So nothing is officially set in stone. This is not the end all be all way of doing things. This is just a way to make sure everything you do in your program has a consistency to it that people get used to. I can even give you one more example. So here's a script that I wrote for our student awards, for our Upper Midwest Emmy Student Production Awards last year. So as you can see, I use upper lowercase here because the talent asked for it to be that way. So I was certainly able to do that. I didn't write it in 2/3, 1/3 format because I made a clean copy just for the teleprompter. So this way I made it a little easier for the director who doesn't know anything how we do it. I would highlight, take graphics so they know this is where the graphics were coming up. I would always have Carla, announce things like that. So this is just a different way. But as you can see, I would have where the anchor is, the shot video full. This is where the director knew that that's where that video went. I let them know how long that tape segment is. I will also put an out cue a lot of times if they need it. Then the director knows they come back on camera to open the envelope. The presenter says this. Then we take this graphic. Here's what the graphic says, etc. So this is how I scripted things for an award show. But but in broadcast things, if I was going to say 10 entries, I would have spelt out 10 entries. I would still keep some of those very same mechanics things in there because I would want to make sure that the anchors read things properly.